I think every guest we have, there's always interesting to see what that little slant is that they bring. And I really got the sense your brain and the way that your brain thinks about design came across there in a way that no other guest has been as conscious and design orientated about thinking about these things that we engage with. And that I'm excited about people seeing. So sponsored by Anoma Booch. I've got a kombucha addiction.
Really?
Yeah, I have. And
when did it start?
When did it start? Well, when I first discovered it a couple of years ago. I'm kind of embarrassed about it, but also not, because I'm told it's very good for the gut. It tastes a bit like feet and smells a bit like horrible feet, but it is not Moma particularly, because Moma's doing a fantastic job, but just generally it does taste and smell. Do you like Booch?
Is this sponsored by Momo, or are they potentially interested in sponsoring?
They are not sponsoring yet, but I'm hoping that they will be at some point soon. Do you like kombucha?
I like kombucha.
Do you?
I like kombucha. I oscillate between flavoured kombucha and non-flavoured kombucha, and I don't know where I've landed yet, but who knows?
It lights the gut up in a good way, not in a bad way, and then it makes you feel like you're doing something good, whether you are or not. And you're paying a fortune, let's be completely clear, you're paying a fortune.
How much does this run you?
This is probably £3-ish, £4, but you know what? It is what it is. There's my Booch, there's Matteo's coffee. Guys, we're in a new setup. Can you believe it? This is the new spot. We're actually in the kitchen, but let's hope that doesn't come across too clearly on the film. Matteo and I met at A Collected Man, whom I'm sure you guys have come across before. Years and years ago, I think we met in the offices. You left there a couple of years ago.
Just over a year ago, yeah.
Just over a year? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Just over a year ago.
Yeah.
Shit. With the intention of setting up your own brand, which is bold. It's bold. How's it been?
It's a lot harder than I thought it'd be, which I think is kind of classic with all these things. But it's been incredible journey. Mm-hmm. It's been really a lot of ups and downs, really fun, but all worthwhile.
Okay. What did you have in your mind? What was the vision? What did you want to create that you thought didn't exist out there at the time?
So it's funny. It never really started with I would like to start a watch brand, and therefore what watch brand can I start? And funny enough, as someone who loves watches, it never even occurred to me. You know, when I was a Collected Man, I was mainly doing vintage, working with independents, doing content, and that was very much my world. And I'd never considered, I should start a watch brand. But then I've always loved and increasingly love watches that are a little bit different. That break the mold in some way, shape or form, and have also with time got more and more interested in other areas of design, whether it's sculpture, furniture, architecture. And I kept feeling there's so many of these iconic watches that are quite sculptural, but there's not that many options out there. And a lot of the options are things that were designed a long time ago, or things that are extraordinarily out of price. And I thought, you know what, I actually think there might be an opportunity to create something here that fits in that mold of something a bit more experimental, really working on the sculptural aspect of the case and of the watch. Mm-hmm. And frankly, just make something that I would love, something that I would wear that I felt wasn't out there. And so it really started with that idea.
Cool. We're going to talk about Matteo's new watch, but we're also going to talk about his collection of watches that he has currently, although I'm fully appreciative of the fact that you have sold a lot of your higher end watches to fund the business, which I really respect. But we're going to come to that afterwards. Let's dive into the watch, because let's not fanny about. This is the Anoma Series 1. First series? How do you refer to it?
A1 first series.
A1 first series.
I try to put in as many ones so it suggests continuity for the brand.
It is a beautiful case shape and a shape that really, although people might feel they've seen it before, they probably haven't. It's inspired by a mid-century table. Is that right?
That's right.
Who was the designer?
So it was designed by a French designer called Charlotte Perriand. And it was really important to me when I started thinking, you know what, shaped watches is the idea I want to explore. There's obviously certain icons in that category, but I didn't want to look at those and think, let's take a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I really wanted the spirit of shaped watches, which is one of eccentricity, of rebellion, of doing something a little bit different, but I wanted that spirit. I didn't necessarily want the design. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, let me go to an area of design that's completely different, that I love, which is furniture, and look around and look at sculpture as well, and look around and see what stimulates me. And I fell very quickly on this shape of the rounded triangle, which was used a lot by Charlotte Perriand, first in the 30s and then continued through her career. So she created a lot of tables in this kind of rounded triangular shape. And so I took that as the foundation and then just ran with it.
I noticed that some of the visuals, which by the way are spectacular, and if you're not following the Anoma Instagram page, you've got to. Beautiful shots. You have one where it's got no strap on, it's just the head of the watch with some pebbles, because it has that pebble-like sense to it. Was she also inspired by that?
So it's funny you say that. So when I was designing it, I was very conscious of how it felt, because I was trying to design something that was a bit more sculptural. A big consideration of mine was, how does it exist as an object? If you were to run your fingers over and feel it, how would it actually feel? And river stones were a big source of inspiration, kind of completely fluid lines. And through the design process with this, I was thinking, well, if you threw this in a river for 200 years...
Could you skim it? Could you skim it?
Someone has suggested this. Someone has suggested I should... It might go plonk quite quickly.
Yeah.
But, even with the Charlotte Payan connection, she was hugely inspired by nature. And funny enough, I started because I loved her table. And then I read about her loads. And she used to collect pieces of wood, fossils, all sorts of stones and pebbles that she could find. And so that shot that I took with the stacked pebbles was obviously because this was designed to feel like a pebble, but it was also kind of a little nod to her and her inspiration, and how heavily she was inspired by nature.
It's funny that today I'm actually wearing this because, of course, the Galet by Laurent Ferrier, this is the blue... Do you like my accent there? Le Laurent Ferrier. I know you speak French far better than me. This is obviously based on the idea that it's a pebble that's sort of aged over time. And I've worn it recently, and I have to say there is a sense to it that it's got a shape that's wonderful. And having worn this, thank you very much for the last week, has been exactly the same sense. The dial's probably the show-stopping element as well as the design of the case. But the lacquer dial, two-tone... Would you describe it as two-tone?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Two-tone finish, but echoing the shape of the case. So you've got a perimeter which matches the interior, and then you've got a darker segment, which is where the markers are. Just give us a quick brief on how you came to that, why.
The dial was tricky. It was a lot of... I think you're very conscious when certain watches are designed and it feels like a case and a dial and hands that are put together, but it doesn't feel like a coherent watch. I think in this case, I started with the case, but then every choice that was made after that was like, how do I balance the case and play with this idea of tension? So with the dial, I wanted quite sharp angular lines with the indexes to counterbalance the case. And I also wanted a dial that was subdued enough that it let the case speak for itself, but still had enough personality. And on a different level, I was also like, if Anoma and the A1 is all about surprising you and kind of shocking you slightly in some ways, how do I do that with the dial in a quite restrained way? So it has all sorts of elements that you're familiar with. It has brushing, it has polishing, it has lacquer, it has blue, but all of them are kind of like twisted slightly in a direction that is unexpected. So brushing and polishing on one surface, you don't see very much. Layering that with lacquer, and it's 3 layers of lacquer. So it's 1 layer of greenish blue and 2 layers of midnight blue. That's slightly unexpected. And even the way it comes together, the kind of two-toneness of it, but in dark light, it can go completely black and glossy. In full sunlight, it's super contrasted. So I wanted something that surprised you and that also evolved with you as you live with the watch and enjoy the watch.
It really has depth to it. It's like nothing else out there, although we're seeing more and more lacquer dials for sure. Give us a name. Give us a brief on the name, just briefly, because I realise we haven't touched on why it's called Anoma.
So this is a classic example of like over-intellectualization of something, but it was... So I landed on the name quite quickly. So Anoma, short for anomaly. And I like that as a word, it's almost perfectly symmetrical, but slightly askew, because you've obviously got the N and the M. And I liked that idea of even graphically, it's a word that's balanced but imbalanced. And for me, that kind of embodies what I was trying to do with Anoma, with the watch, and hopefully represents to some extent the people that like this, that there's a little bit out there. And even graphically on the dial, for example, the way I've designed it is the 2 A's are the same size and 2 flat top A's. The N and the M are the same size, and the O is a perfect circle that's then sliced in the middle.
And I love the fact that you've kept it a modest size, because one thing that really bugs me is that some brands now love blowing up the logo to a point where it just doesn't feel... vintage watches we know and love typically have smaller logos, and you've gone for something like that, which I really appreciate. Beautiful sort of leaf style hands. I love the painted dial. Let's get on to the price briefly, because that plays into the movement and why you wanted to keep this a watch that I think most would consider to be approachable, and that's cool. It's a watch for most people.
And that was the logic as well, is design something that's not about making a watch affordable or necessarily, but I really wanted to have a design that was accessible to a lot of people. So the price is £1,300, and I still wanted certain fundamentals. So it has an automatic Solita movement. It's Swiss made. As much as possible, I've tried to have the quality as high as possible, but really still be affordable and still be approachable to certain watch lovers, but still not compromising on the details. So it was quite important to me. And I think the nice thing about the price point being, you know, expensive but still affordable for a lot of people is it's led to like quite human stories, like people seeing it in a bar and coming up to me and what is it, and then buying it. You've got couples buying it together. You have a father who's bought one for him and one for his daughter, like bought two. And I think obviously that can happen all sorts of price points, but the affordability and accessibility, I think, opens up those human elements of it a lot more.
Agreed. Let's touch on the availability before we move on to your
Yeah.
watches. It's available for a period of time.
That's
so
right.
you've opted against the model of having limited editions, but this particular variation with this blue dial and this case is available for how it's now. I don't even know what the date is now, but it's available now.
It's available now.
It will be available when this goes live. Up until when?
So it became available yesterday, on the 6th of June. It'll be
6th of
available until the 6th of July.
A month,
So
okay.
what we're doing is essentially we're opening pre-orders for 30 days. We'll make all the watches that we receive pre-orders for in that period. And then once pre-order closes, we'll never remake the watch in this configuration again. And the logic of going for that model was really wanting to give everyone who wants one and discovers it in the 30 days a chance to buy one, and therefore have it be accessible to people who want one. But at the same time, also making it limited, making it feel special. And so in that sense, all of them will be engraved first series on the case back. When we say we won't reproduce it, you know, this blue dial and this process won't be reused in the future. And so it was finding the right balance of everyone who wants one can get one, but then protecting the first series and thanking people who are supporting us early on in the journey with something special and limited.
Good man. Right, there we go. Guys, I've got to say, if you can't tell already, I'm a huge fan of the watch in Matteo. And I love the fact that a young guy has put all of it on the line to build something super cool. And it's interesting that you've struck it, you know, it's a cliche, but it's all about timing, right? Business is all about timing. It feels right now that we are seeing a lot of the watches that you seem to love from the past, in their essence, coming back to life. So we've got Toledo and Chan, Mr. Enthusiast, out there with his new watch this week. We've got Gerald Genta coming out with a series from LVMH this week based on some historic designs, all very beautiful, elegant, delicate maybe dress, jewelry shapes. So it feels like it is the moment right now. And then we've got Berger on as well. Let's not forget Bergeron, who smashed it at Watches Wonders. So it feels like this is the moment right now for you, which is super exciting. But you've brought along a few watches that give us some context to where your love of all of this comes from. Start with the first one, will you, Matteo?
We can start with this. So this
Start
is
with the first one.
I mean, I'm preaching to the converted, but
Maybe
when
not
it comes
shaped,
to
maybe
swatch,
not shaped, but this represents fun.
Yeah.
This is pure fun.
And I think this is, I worked at a collected man for 4 years, and so was around some really exceptional watches from any caliber for many years, day in, day out, and really love those. But I think the great thing about being around those kinds of watches all the time is you end up really developing your own interests and what feels special to you. And I gravitated to Swatch really quickly because it's all design, it's a behemoth in terms of cultural weight, and I like that it is just pure fun and nothing else. And I always used to call it as like the ultimate non-compete watch. Because I think the cool thing, a collector man especially, like people would come in with simplicities, with insane jaunts. And it's not saying I'm playing a different game, but it's very much like, I have my bright yellow Swatch, it's what I like, it makes me incredibly happy. And I think it also reminds you that, in a way, whatever rocks your boat. And so I think that can be a hyper complicated Patek, and it can be something like this. The only thing that really matters is the emotion it gives you. And I've had more high-end watches than this, and I love those as well for different reasons, but I get as much joy, if not more joy, from these kinds of watches.
Totally agree. Yeah, I spoke to my friend old Mike Hill from Drake's about this years ago, because it's sort of the Drake's on Savile Row clothing business, but he's always enjoyed the bright swatch as a sort of a statement piece, as an intention of his character, the fun in design and style. And weirdly, on the weekend, talking to a friend who's in banking, he's like, I want to get a fancy watch. It's like, the way I see it is you either you go high or you go low. And that's where there's a bit of, and it's all about conversation. And this is a conversation piece, no doubt. Absolutely love that. Canary yellow with the contrasting blue buckle. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Up next, is it this one in chronological order?
Yes.
Bloody hell, here we go. So this is a 70s Seiko.
This is a 70s Seiko. That, fun enough, used to belong to my grandfather. So this was my grandfather's watch that he wore every day for the longest time. And it was lying around the house for the longest time. And then a few years ago, I picked it back up, started wearing it. And it is so representative of the 70s, right? It's got this TV-shaped case.
And big blocky, like a monoblock style stainless steel case. With a bit of sort of polishing on the edges, but then a matte brush finish for the rest of the case. And then sort of an echoed brushed dial, which I love. That I love seeing the case and the dial sort of merge into one almost. Beautiful. And so he wore this.
He wore this. And the funny thing is, they made a smaller version of this that was like a woman's version that's this big. That I've tried to wear, but it's, the bracelet's slightly too small. And my grandmother used to wear that one. And I never got the chance to ask him, but I wonder if they bought them as a set at the time. But he wore it for the longest time possible and then stopped wearing it. And so a few years ago, I picked it back up and initially just picked it back up because it was his and started wearing it and didn't think much of the design, but it's really grown on me over time. I think it's so symptomatic of the era. It shows how they used to treat, going back to this idea of like treating the watch as a whole, like the case and the bracelet are thought in coherence. As you said, the dial is an extension of the case with the brushing. It's a great example yet again of, it's a Seiko. It's not a particularly special or expensive watch by many metrics, but it's so well thought through and it's doing the best version of what it does, and that's why I love it.
That's a lovely line, is the best version of what it does. All of the brands out there have something that they do, and it's lovely to see a brand do something really well that it does well. You know, more of what it does well, rather than trying to be everything to everyone. And I love that idea. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And I love just the Japan stamp there at 6 o'clock. I don't know if they've changed the day. There's a contrast between the day and the date. Maybe that was for design and legibility, to have sort of a contrasting element. God knows, but beautiful and intriguing.
It's a tired cliche, but it often ends up being true. The like functional choices end up making like aesthetically brilliant choices.
I love it, really, and I love the taupe strap that you've gone for there. Then we move on to sort of a period here in this double act of watches from Pierre Cardin, which a couple of years ago it felt like we're having a bit of a moment. I guess maybe at the very start of this big journey that we've gone on in shaped watches, but that was almost sort of one of the key driving brands to start getting people excited about these sort of things. What have we got here? We've got a blue and a red.
So we've got two. So as I mentioned, started getting interested in shaped watches a few years ago and started, I'd seen really what mechanics could do and the best that they could be pushed to when I was a collecting man, and I'd seen, the element with dials really being pushed in terms of finishing, but more and more I got interested in cases, and at first it was case finishing, it was case shape within certain parameters, but then, I kept wanting to push it further and further and further, and that's why I ended up on shaped watches, and I very quickly discovered Pierre Cardin, and he made, in the early 70s, something called the Espace collection, which actually means space collection, inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey, which came out a few years earlier, by some of the first space exploration, by his general universe, which is mixing of kind of sci-fi and innovation. And he made these watches in collaboration with Jaeger-LeCoultre for a few years, I think just for like 3-4 years at the start of the 70s. There's a whole gamut. I have 3-4 of them, but I fell in love with them at the time, and so brought two along.
They're bloody brilliant. They're
so fun.
They're wearable. They're still wearable, and incredible value. We touched on it before we started filming, but JLC movement.
Yeah.
Likely a couple £100 if you can find one in good working order.
So I bought them a few years ago. I think they're a little bit more now, but this is the great thing. I think they're still, because they're quite unique and they're very 70s. That bright, bold color. They've got large pieces of plastic. The scales are very different, but I love the experimentation. And for me, it's a great example of someone who's designed completely outside the field of watches, doesn't have any of the preconceptions or awareness of the quote-unquote rules, and therefore does things that are really bold. And, both in the use of materials, in the proportions, in the way the elements are structured. And that's what I love about them. There's a real freshness to them. Even the design of the buckles.
The buckle.
The whole thing is a little bit nuts.
The buckle really does look handmade in the most raw, honest sense. You could have crafted that in the bloody shed.
You might have done. You might have done.
It's brilliant. Stick it on, just because I'd love to see it on you, because it is
And this is the other funny thing. So I tend to wear quite small watches. And the funny thing about some of the designs, so this one is probably what, 40, 44? I've never measured it, 45. But because it has the dial that's kind of cut in the middle, this almost feels like a frame to a watch.
Yeah.
And so he also played with proportion. I mean, the case is curved.
Yeah.
It's obviously got no lugs, so it wears kind of a little bit shorter. But he also played with proportion in a really interesting way. I think a lot of the time, because watches are designed with a watch head and lugs, 44 and 45 is very different to 38 to 36. Whereas with these shaped watches, because you're kind of tugging at all the notions of what you're used to, like size doesn't mean as much, lug to lug doesn't mean as much.
Look how it doesn't flare over your wrist, even though you have smaller wrists and you like smaller cases generally. That to me fits you.
Yeah.
Whether it's comfortable or not is another story.
Super comfortable.
Because it's quite wide, but it doesn't to me, when I see a photo particularly, you see the case size overlapping or the lugs overlapping, you start to wonder, is that a bit big?
Yeah.
That's really the barometer. I think it's kind of been on my mind more and more, size. I mean, it's not the first time size has been on my mind. I grew up in my teens. Size, Brit's face, size has been on my mind for many, many years. But the reality is, size is a predominant concern and question in a lot of collectors' minds out there. You see it online every day. And the reality is, I think we can get a bit sort of snobby about it. Sometimes it's like, shit, if it's anything more than 36, 37, it's not elegant. But the truth is, it's very personal to you. And I would say it comes down to that particular barometer, which, as you said, you can't always know by the number. The lug to lug is, with these shapes as well, is almost irrelevant. A good example of that in the modern era was the Renaissance, a Type 5 dive watch, which is 46 mil, but the way it sits on, it's very organic, no lugs at all. So it sits in the middle of your wrist. Quite interesting.
It's very, I mean, I always think this with Royal Oaks as well. You know, I always find that they basically, in terms of size, always feel 2 to 3 millimeters larger than they actually are. I mean, I wore a 36 millimeter Royal Oak for the longest time, and for me, it was great, but it felt too big. It felt like it was 38, 39. And I started wearing a 33 millimeter Royal Oak, which for me wears like a 35 or 36. But you kind of need to start wearing them and getting a feel for those to really then realize that the way things wear is so much more than the diameter. It's obviously the way that the bracelet or strap extends from the case. It's also the way the case is built and it sits on the wrist, as you were saying, with the Renaissance. So even this, when I was designing this, so much of it factored into that in terms of, well, how does the strap sit flush or not sit flush with the case? How is the bottom of the case sit, and therefore how is it on the wrist? What's the lug to lug? And also mentally, with certain shaped watches, you fill in or empty space.
Yes.
So when there's an absence of space, if your mind draws a circle, you will fill in space, and vice versa, you will remove space. So a lot of perception of wearability, size, kind of ends up going out the window. But I think wearing loads of different watches over the years, shaped watches, non-shaped watches, you kind of start realizing what those triggers are.
The lug to lug, I'm just thinking, what?
So this is technically 39 by 39. 39 by 39.
But there are no lugs.
There are no lugs. I'd say it probably wears like a 37, 36, 37. And the thing is, even with the strap, so I've added a little bit of metal under the strap. So the strap actually looks like it extends from the case rather than dropping flat, which I think is a thing I love about certain Royal Oaks or certain watches when the strap is kind of fully integrated, is you feel like it's one continuous object and not necessarily a watch and then the strap drops off. And I like it when watches are designed with that kind of like, it's a coherent whole.
Matteo, God, this has been so much fun. Where can people find you, and what's next for the brand? And when can they meet you? When can they come and say hello to you? What's going on?
Justin's door is always open.
My dress is number 36. No, it's not. What's going on? Give us a brief before we close.
As I said, opened pre-orders for this about yesterday. Open until the 6th of July. I check Instagram DMs about every 4 to 5 seconds. So
harass the man. Send him a cheeky pic on a Sunday night in the DMs.
I'll go with an instant scene from me. But always kind of happy to chat, happy to meet people. And in terms of what's next, I think it's been kind of incredible to see the reaction to this already. Even this morning, someone who bought the watch yesterday, who just discovered the watch, went out first thing to buy a Charlotte Perron book. And was like reading up on it this morning. We're having a chat about that. So it's the early days of kind of just seeing how it all unfolds, seeing this that's been in my life for so long and all I think about now exists in other people's lives. And so kind of excited for a little while to see how that goes, and then we'll see what's next.
Brilliant. Well, my little daughter, who's almost 2, There she is. She's not coming in like Benji always does to our chat. She grabbed all these Pierre Cardin, and including yours, and she was having a good play around, and she loved it. So if the response from everybody out there so far to this, and her response is anything to go by, it's going to be a good year. Matteo, thank you so much, my boy. Lovely to see you.
Thank you for having me.
And also, I should say, the coolest thing about this is, and it is personal, but I hope that the chat, you guys got a sense of what this man's like. Sometimes brands can be anonymous, and actually the truth is, it's lovely to be able to connect to a brand and know the person behind it, especially when it's a solo founder putting it all on the line, putting everything on the line for something great. So cheers, guys. Thanks for watching. Leave your comments below, even if they are negative, because I will be responding to them personally as well. Until next time, go well. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
So enjoyed that, brother. So enjoyed that.
Fun.
You brought a whole new slant to. I think every guest we have, there's always interesting to see what that little slant is that they bring, and I really got the sense your brain and the way that your brain thinks about design came across there in a way that no other guest has been as conscious and design orientated about thinking about these things that we engage with, and that I'm excited about people seeing.